November 29th. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joined by Ray Roa, the editor-in-chief for Creative Loafing, and Ben Montgomery, author and independent journalist. And we're hanging out here on this quasi-holiday, guys, the day after Thanksgiving. Pretty mellow. There's like nobody here in the station, of course. It's a holiday here for the MNF staff.
I'll tell you who is here. Skip Sassy and Irene Matthews on the phones there.
Yes, they are.
It's pretty cool.
So, right, we have our crew here ready to take your phone calls later in the show if you'd like to call in. We're going to talk. In fact, we've got our guest on the line right now. We've got St. Petersburg City Council member Richie Floyd. And we're talking about a couple things. Obviously, we're going to talk about the Tampa Bay Rays and the latest developments there, but also, As you know, the Bay Area, we went through Hurricanes Milton and Helene not that long ago, and still in St. Pete and Pinellas County, dealing with a lot of issues with that. And how's the city coping with that? We want to get into that as well. But let's see. Councilman Floyd, are you there with us?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Welcome back, Richie, to the skinny here on WMNF. So let's get to the matters at hand. Right now, I think we're waiting, right? Kathleen Peters, the county chair for the Pinellas County chairwoman, wrote to the Michael Auld of the Rays a couple days ago and said, hey, you know, we've had this issue both in the county commission meeting and the city council where it looks like this deal for the Rays baseball stadium is not going to happen. But we need to see it in writing, she said. And she wants to see the letter by December 1st, which, of course, is Sunday. And I'm sure that will go all to the members of the city council as well. Have you heard anything yet from Mr. Auld?
I haven't heard anything yet. I mean, it is a holiday, like you mentioned earlier. So, no. I mean, I could say I did not diligently check my email yesterday, though. So, no, I haven't heard anything.
Right. But we expect to hear something in the next couple of days, the December 1st deadline. So, in a nutshell, folks, I'm sure most of you know this. Basically, there was a deal back in the summertime, this long, drawn-out 17-year saga of the Tampa Bay Rays trying to find a new home, whether it was going to be in Tampa or, St. Petersburg. It's going to be part of this development project there, 86 acres there, right next to where it's at there in the gas plant district, et cetera. It was signed, sealed, delivered. And then in the last month, this kind of all broke apart. Partly it's people saying the hurricanes had something to do with it. The Rays have said...
I mean, that's why we're talking about this, right? Primarily, the hurricane blew the roof off the truck.
Well, that is kind of separate, though, right? Because, in fact, that is delaying... Well, let's get your thoughts about this, Richie, because I believe the Rays have said that there was going to be a vote in the county commission to approve the bonds in some point in early October, and because a storm happened, the county just said we're going to get back to that a little later. We've got bigger pressing issues. And the Rays are now basically saying when they delayed that vote, and now, of course, it's been subsequently delayed, that screwed everything up. Is that what they kind of have said here, essentially?
I mean, generally, yes. It's hard to see how saying, we're going to vote on these bonds 3 weeks, 4 weeks from now, could destroy an entire years-long agreement. But, there's that, and there's the Rays saying that the delay itself, the 3 or 4 weeks, meant that they had to push it out an entire year.
Do you believe that?
No, I don't believe it. Are you kidding me? Just to be blunt with you, like, the fact that it took a few extra weeks, it doesn't sound good. And there was some comments made by Commissioner Brian Scott that said the Rays already had talked to him about not being able to afford to do the deal as it existed before the delay ever happened. And so I think really from my perspective, and I think the county and the city have coalesced around this, the Rays in the agreement said that they would pay for all cost overruns. And now that they're anticipating cost overruns for a couple of reasons, like maybe it will take an extra year. I think it was always going to take an extra year, and the idea that 2028 was the case was fanciful. It even says in the agreement that the deal works as long as it happens before 2030. They're saying because it's going to take an extra year, and, I'm sure them losing revenue from not being able to play in their stadium impacts it as well.
Right.
They're just not going to have as much funding as they would have anticipated before. And since they're on the hook for the cost overruns, they've come out and said, like, we cannot absorb the cost overruns alone, which is not, very good partnership, in my opinion. If you tell somebody you're going to do something, you do it. But that's neither here nor there. This is sort of the way public-private partnerships work. You always socialize the losses, privatize the profits. So it's not a surprise at all. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. But the thing is that they've said it publicly, went on TV and said it in our council meeting, wrote it in a letter, although it wasn't super clear in the letter. Because all of those things have happened, the county and the city are like, please write it down, specifically the county. And I guess it's County Commission Chair Peters have said, please write down what you intend to do by December 1st, because if you intend to terminate the agreement, just send it to us in a letter so that we can all say, okay, this is off. And if you're like, no, we'll go forward or whatever, like just say, okay, we'll go forward and let us have our votes on the bonds and go forward. But the thing that I think the public needs to know is if they don't terminate the agreement in writing and just continue to say, hey, we don't want to do this, we don't want to do this. So either the county or the city votes not to issue the bonds because they're saying they don't want to do it, then that means that the stadium agreement falls apart. But the agreement for the other 65 acres of the historic gas plant district, the development agreement that Hines, the developer, and Rays are a part of, will still be locked in. And the only way that we can end that agreement is if the Rays are the ones to terminate the deal, the stadium deal. And so it looks to me and probably a lot of other people like they're trying to get us to be the ones to terminate the stadium agreement so that they can still be the ones who redevelop the land surrounding the stadium.
Wow. And that land, of course, controversial in the way that it was sold to the Rays, considering what some people thought it was worth. And I know over the summer you pushed back on that. Councilman, let me ask you, still in the context of the Rays, you won your election by just getting out there, knocking on doors, talking to your constituents. After the hurricanes, you were out there. How much have you been able to engage them about this latest saga in the Rays thing? It seems like the Bay Area, after these hurricanes, has different priorities now. Do you see that with your constituents? Are they over talking about the Rays thing and they'd rather talk about stormwater and things like that? What are you hearing from your constituents in the weeks after the storms and in the context of the Rays thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question because, even my own personal feelings are pretty strong on this topic. But yeah, when I talk to constituents, even constituents that supported the agreement, after the the hurricanes, a lot of people are not focused on the baseball team and the stadium agreements. They're focused on getting their lives back on track. And, myself personally, I said it in the meeting the other day, my house flooded, a bunch of houses in my district, which is 40 feet above sea level, flooded during Hurricane Milton, and we're struggling to get back on our feet. A lot of us don't have flood insurance. This is not what I want to be talking about right now. I want to be talking about what recovery looks like in our city. I want to be talking about what building a more resilient city looks like. And this issue is monopolizing my time. Mm-hmm. And so I'm hearing that same thing from a lot of constituents as well. Not universally, I'll say. Very few have, they're desperate for us to solve the agreement. They don't want to see the Rays leave. And I totally understand that perspective. They care a lot about baseball and the team, and they're big fans. Now, that is a small amount of correspondence I'm getting right now, but I do understand that perspective. But even people like that right now are saying to me, like, that they're tired of the conversation. They're tired of the back and forth and the arguing that's been going on around the agreement. And they just want to see it resolved so we can move on.
And we're going to, and by the way, we're talking to St. Petersburg City Council member Richie Floyd here. We're going to talk about that, Councilman, in a minute, about what the city is trying to do looking forward to deal in terms of the ramifications of the hurricanes here. But I want to go back. We've been talking about Kathleen Peters and the letter that she wrote the other day to, I think on Monday, it was sent out to Brian Auld, the president of the Tampa Bay Rays. And the letter, I'm going to read a portion of that. She, quote, "As you know," she writes, "the agreement requires the Rays to pay all cost overruns. That agreement was signed by all the parties. 3 months later, the night before the county commission meeting to approve the bonds, Commissioner Brian Scott, as you mentioned, Richie, Commissioner Brian Scott called Rays President Michael Auld to ask that he make a public statement reaffirming commitment to the agreement and that the Rays would do what was necessary to try and remain playing locally. Not only did Mr. Auld remain silent to quell concerns of the public, but he went on to complain to the Commissioner of Baseball, that the Rays' revenue was down and that anticipated project costs going up were putting the project in jeopardy. This, again, on the day before the commission met to vote on issuing the bonds. Therefore, the notion that it was the county that, quote, killed the deal, end quote, is categorically false based on the Rays president's own statements prior to the county's action. Because we have heard that. In fact, we had Vince Nowicki on here a few weeks ago, just newly elected Pinellas County Commissioner, who is definitely a critic of the deal, as is, with Chris Scherr, the other county commissioner who was won on Election Day. So there is a transition on the board, but that isn't part of the narrative now from the Rays. Is now we see, and not just the Rays. I've heard from the Democratic Party in Pinellas County, they're blaming these Republican commissioners now for like thwarting this whole thing. But obviously, as we've been talking about, it's a little more complex than that. But let's go back to Mayor Ken Welch, because the mayor, look, this is a big deal for him, obviously, and for the city of St. Petersburg. He's the leader of the city. What's going to happen next? Okay, let's say we do get this letter in the next couple of days and it's officially terminated. Ken Welch has said that the plan is by no means over, that he wants to come back and work on a plan while acknowledging there will not be one more cent coming from the city. And we know the county, right? I mean, they're certainly not going to, if they're still going to pony up the $312 million that they said they're going to do, it's not going to be any more than that. And yet the Rays are saying, we don't have enough money right now because of things that have changed. So I don't know. We'll all be watching Mayor Ken Welch, what he comes up with. But if St. Petersburg is not going to come up with any more money, and doubtfully the county is going to, I don't know how, when the Rays are saying that the money is now, we're pushing it back another year, and it's going to cost, I think they said they already spent $50 million on this thing, right? I believe they said that already. So, I mean, again, how is this going to be resolved in the short term here, in your thoughts, Councilman Floyd?
I think anything that I say on how exactly it's going to be resolved is just speculation at this point. Sure. What I can say is to all that is that the county and the city so far have not done anything to kill the agreement. The only thing that's happened from the county and the city is that we have delayed our votes on issuing the bonds that are required to pay for the agreement. And, they were relatively minor delays considering how long this has all been in the works. The city's was just under 7 weeks or something like that at the maximum, because it could be shorter than that. And the counties was just a few weeks, a couple of times. There's nothing stopping the city and the county from just approving those agreements. And yeah, there's new county commissioners, but it remains to be seen as to whether or not they only need one vote to flip at the county. One. I think right now there's 4 skeptics and 3 supporters.
Right.
Some of the skeptics could easily change their vote. It's only one vote.
I believe I read that Chris Scherr says he's open to hearing from them.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So I don't know what the 4 skeptics on the county's position is, but it's not hard to imagine that one of those people will see that it might be beneficial for them to come around, or maybe they can get something.
Sure.
It's not hard to imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if all of that were to happen, then really the only thing that would have occurred throughout this entire process is that the city and the county just were a little late on delaying the bonds. Yeah. So now it's the Rays that are saying things like, because they elected 2 people who are no votes, the deal is dead. A vote has not happened. So, I just find all of that difficult to believe. Now, how to resolve all of this, I think that that's still up in the air. What will happen with what will happen with the Rays and this December 1st deadline? Look, they already said a little something. I saw it online. It was not clear at all. So I don't know if they're going to say any more or if they're just going to let the deadline pass. I have no idea. But, I think I just want to go back to maybe it's not in our best interest. Maybe it is. But the conversation that I think needs to be happening is, are the Rays trying to get out of the stadium agreement and still keep the 65 acres surrounding the stadium?
That is the big question. In fact, our mutual friend Ryan Reyes has texted in a note here. He says, what are the chances of the nightmare scenario where the land deal stands but the Rays still move?
You know, I hope that the county commissioners and the other city council members are aware that that's a possibility. And, you know, to call it a nightmare scenario, is quite strong language. But the truth is that we would have a development that was centered around a baseball stadium that doesn't involve a baseball stadium, and that's not ideal. And we also gave them the land for pennies on the dollar. I think the administration's perspective was, because they're going to give us a baseball stadium, and now we're not going to have one, and it's not good. So I don't know. I wish I could tell you, look into the future and tell you that this is exactly how it's going to play out, but I think we're still sort of in a standoff right now.
By the way, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to WMNF 88.5 Community Radio, and you're listening to Skenny with Ben Montgomery, Ray Rowe, and Mitch Perry, and we've got St. Pete City Council member Richie Floyd on talking to us about the future of the Trop deal, etc.
Yeah, if you want to call in 813-239-9663, you can send a text 813-433-0885, dj@wmnf.org for an email.
And I want to pivot to talking about the city dealing with the hurricanes. One more thing on this, the stadium, and that is, Richie, we know you basically never supported this, essentially. Let's just be frank. You're one of the no votes there from the beginning, because I don't think you believe in publicly subsidizing private owners to baseball stadiums. And yet...
Is that true, Richie?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't believe in it's beyond that. You know, local governments should not be subsidizing massive corporations in general.
And we had the debate this summer, and there was a citywide debate. The folks, the no home runs now, they're home runs. What's the new saying?
Home runs matter.
And they, and we had Kerry Muller here, and they've been fighting the good fight in terms of making the deal. They were like, we're not against the deal. We want to make the deal better. Whether it was on environmental concerns, the whole different, housing, the affordable housing aspect and all that. Richie, as somebody who was against this, but I know that you're an open-minded person in terms of knowing how important this issue is to the city. The way it's all played out in terms of the deal itself, and say it was still going to go ahead. You were a no vote, like I said, throughout. But do you think the city could have made a better deal when you committed the $287 million directly, and then, of course, more money for the infrastructure to the state of the deal that may ultimately be null and void here in a couple of days officially?
Yeah, so could we have done a better deal? Absolutely. I mean, I stated on principle, I did not get elected to funnel public wealth and public tax dollars to private corporations. I did not do that. And I've said that from the second that I started running for office, because it's been a topic the entire time. But at the same time, taking a step back, I evaluate things objectively. And yeah, we could have negotiated in something different. And so, for example, I made a huge fuss about the stipulations around affordable housing in the agreement, and how there's opportunity for the developer and the Rays to pay their way out of building any of it, or if they, just fail to acquire even more government subsidy later on, they just don't have to build it. And so we could have fixed things like that. We also, could have just pointed to the fact that this stadium deal, just the cash value of it, the $600 million from the city and the county, was the biggest stadium subsidy in the history of Major League Baseball.
Really?
The next biggest subsidy was the Atlanta Braves subsidy, which was around $300 million. And the next biggest even contemplated subsidy is the deal in Las Vegas that will probably fall through at this point. And that's only for $400 million. And so to say, could we get a better deal? Yeah, I think we could have. But, I think it goes back to were the Rays a willing partner to begin with? And we're seeing that play out right now as to whether or not they're actually willing to follow through on the things like the cost overruns. And so, could we have gotten one better? Yeah, I think it sort of boils down to that. It's just this is the situation we're in right now, and we'll have to see how it gets resolved.
Let's pivot to the hurricanes and dealing with that. And did you just say, and I think you'd said this, your own place got flooded out?
Yeah, so I live near the main library, the Barack Obama Library in St. Pete. There's a big lake behind it, Lake Jorgensen Lake, however you want to call it. It's a part of our stormwater system, along with some other lakes in the city, like Lake Maggiore or Emerald Lake is also in my district in North Kenwood. The Round Lake on 49th Street and just north of 22nd Avenue. And these lakes all flooded precipitously during Hurricane Milton. And this is a thing not a lot of people know or understand. We got 20 inches of rain in about 6 hours during Hurricane Milton, and with about 18 of it coming in 3 hours. That's the amount of rain that the city got in all of July and August, which were very wet months this past year, all within 6 hours. And so places that were near stormwater lakes or lakes that are part of our stormwater system, a lot of places flooded, and they're places that are well above sea level, aren't required to have flood insurance, don't have flood insurance. Mm-hmm. My house is like multiple blocks away from the 500-year floodplain. And like the FEMA floodplain, and we got 8 inches in the conversion part of our house and about 2 inches through the rest of it. And it happened in a lot of like working class neighborhoods, seniors on fixed income, neighborhoods with small homes that aren't used to this kind of thing, because we got a 1 in 1,000 year rainfall event during Hurricane Milton. And that's what I've been focused on. I've been focused on it all year because we had multiple 1 in 100 year rainfall events that flooded some homes in my area. And this is not even talking about what happened during Helene and all the homes closer to the water near the FEMA flood zones that flooded. And so, there's a lot. And it's expensive. And like I said, I don't personally have flood insurance, and neither do a lot of people in my district because we're so high above sea level and, never anticipated a 1 in 1,000 year rainstorm. And we're having to put our lives back together by ourselves without much help. And it's really, I think, something that is much bigger than, a sports team right now. And so it's been frustrating, the contours of the conversation. And I know, this is what the media is interested in, and I'm happy to come have the conversation, but I think it's worth it for my constituents to know that, this is not what I want to be talking about. Yeah, I want to be talking about how to get our lives back on track.
We understand there's over 11,000 people who were, lost at least temporarily their housing because of the storm. Now, have you had to be displaced at all, or are you still at your own place there?
No, fortunately, the back of my house is a little higher than the front, and so my bedroom is the only room in the house that did not get any water in it. We were able to go do all of our flood cuts, tear out the floors throughout the house, and still stay just in our bedroom. And so it's not comfortable. It's really cleaned up now, but we're able to stay at our house for that reason.
And we know there's other council members, right? I believe Councilwoman Brandy Gabbard had serious damage. Ed Montanari, who now left the board. So
it's interesting you mentioned, Richie, with the retention ponds swelling and flooding. That same thing happened in Tampa, Robles Park, just north of downtown Tampa, far away from the coast. I mean, relatively far, but the rains came, and that
there's a pump issue there. We don't quite know what happened.
But no one expected the local pond to escape its banks and actually flood, the entire neighborhood.
And what were the contents of that water and things like that?
How do you fix stormwater issues like that? I mean, where would you put all that extra water? Is this just something we live with now?
Yeah, I think that it's sort of twofold. I'm always one to say, we as a city and as a region could always do a better job. Our priorities need to be making our area more resilient because of climate change, human-caused, fossil fuel-caused climate change. And we need to do everything we can to invest in our infrastructure to mitigate that invest in homes to make sure that they're prepared for the possibility of this happening in the future. And we also need to realize that we are in a different world. And so it's two-pronged, like getting people prepared, both like structurally and infrastructure-wise, and also, getting people prepared, I guess, mentally and emotionally, and they're in an individual capacity to know that I don't anticipate personally like a 1 in 1,000 year rainfall event being a common occurrence. Like that's what Hurricane Milton was for our region. And I don't anticipate that being a common occurrence. But like I said, over the summer, we had Hurricane Debbie. That was a 1 in 100 year rainfall event. And the event in my neighborhood that was most impactful was a rainstorm. I believe it was on August 29th. And it was just an afternoon rainstorm. Yeah. And we got as much as 7 inches of rain within 1 hour. And a lot of homes in my area flooded from that as well. And so those kind of storms, I do anticipate being more common now and much more frequent. Afternoon rainstorms, just holding so much more water in the atmosphere because there's so much more heat in the atmosphere. More heat's more energy. More energy can pull more water up into the atmosphere and can dump it on us. And so I do think that we should be preparing ourselves for that. Now, what does that look like? I think it looks like a massive investment in our stormwater infrastructure and in protecting homes as well. And I think what we saw over the summer when we had one afternoon rainstorm that flooded homes that were 40 feet above sea level is that no one in our region is safe from the effects of climate change. No one is safe. And so we need to have a holistic outlook, not just around the coast, but around our entire area, so what we can be doing better.
We know that, again, we're speaking with St. Petersburg City Council member Richie Floyd here on the Skinny WMNF 1132 in the morning here. You're just tuning in right now. We're live here the day after Thanksgiving. Richie, I know that the council met recently to talk about your asks to the state legislative delegation, right? Because Tallahassee, where they do convene, well, they're going to start having committee meetings in a couple of weeks, actually, but March is when the full session begins. And there's a lot that hopefully the legislature will look at in terms of addressing these storms. I believe you guys have a document that states that hurricane recovery efforts have underscored the need for a workforce skilled at mitigating storm damage and rebuilding after the fact. You want the legislature to support training programs encompassing forecasting, floodplain management, construction, emergency preparedness, and other emerging technologies. Another thing you want to do, I guess locally here is, right, implement ordinances that protect residents from biological hazards and storm impacts without state interference. You got a lot on your plate there, right, that you like even, I guess what are you looking at for? I know you have asked for Tallahassee, but what are you guys even looking at now, like maybe passing ordinances to deal with some of this stuff, whether it comes to, water quality or housing in terms of, in relation to the storms?
Yeah, so fortunately, we have been having discussions at the city about this for a while, and the storm just sort of reaffirms, what I believe should be our biggest commitment to it. And the city's created a stormwater master plan to try to handle runoff as best as we possibly can. And I think that these storms should be sort of a wake-up call to say, okay, we wrote out that we're going to spend this much money, but we need to, reallocate resources to really, really invest in this. And that's what I've heard from the mayor's office, to be really fair and pleased with them, that's what they're interested in as well. And so I'm looking forward to actually doing this work. I think, to be optimistic, because I think we all need some optimism right now. These storms presents an opportunity to do what I was hoping to get elected and be a part of, which is really fundamentally and structurally change the priorities of our region and our city and our state as a whole, to be one that says we can't do things the way that they've always been done. We need a big change that invests in the working people of our state, that invests in protecting the homes of our state and the infrastructure of our state, the size of things like New Deal programs that sort of fundamentally restructure the government and the power system to actually benefit working people. And I think these storms really show us that, like, we don't have a choice. We have to do this, or we're going to continue to leave behind the people who have, like, built and made this state what it is today. The retirees that moved here, to be on a fixed income, to have a nice, cheap place to live. The working people who built the cities, these are the people who are relying on us to really make these changes. And I hope that the storms are indiscriminate enough to convince people who don't necessarily agree with that political perspective to come around and realize that, like, we're all in this together, and we can do things to make our state more resilient and better for everyone. And so I'm really hoping that the state listens to the things that we're telling them. I'm cautiously optimistic that they, even if they, still treat us not as I would hope exactly, they at least see that it's worthwhile to invest in making sure we're a resilient place to live. And so I think it's possible that we'll get some state help this coming year and this coming legislative session. And then on top of that, locally, because we made the Stormwater Master Plan, we're in discussion about upgrading our ordinances to make sure that any sort of commercial or future development has high standards. The county's looking at updating its impact fees. We recently updated our fees for attaching to our wastewater system. And so I think that there's reason to be optimistic. I just really hope that we can take as big and bold of steps that are required at this time, really.
Councilman, you kind of alluded to this. Let me ask you something. I talked with, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, Alec Wilkowski. He worked on your campaign for city council. And since since you've been sworn in, you've been governing as Florida's first openly socialist elected official. And I talked with Alec about Pinellas County's Democratic Socialists of America, and he mentioned that since the election, paid dues members, that percentage has grown by 13% just in the last month. And across the country, DSA has added 5,000 new members nationwide since November 5. And I'm wondering, not to think too far into midterms and things like that, but as DSA grows and people start to become a little bit more open to joining a party like that and working on those things that you mentioned, items for the working class, coming together on those kinds of things. What role will the Pinellas chapter of that party play in the local politics and getting things done? Have you noticed that growth as well? And are you optimistic about whether or not DSA can change the conversation about priorities and whatnot locally?
Yeah, you mentioned it. Like, I'm a proud Democratic Socialist. That's how I got involved in politics. It was, I had been an independent until 2015, and I'm a registered Democrat. The Democratic Socialists of America is just an activist organization. And in 2015, I got involved in politics because of Bernie Sanders' run and because of him saying that, like, big structural change is possible and necessary. I remember I watched one video of him, like, calling for an end to the forever wars in the Middle East and saying we need universal health care and to end money in politics. And that was literally like a light bulb went on in my head. And so this is what I've always believed in, is like big change for working people is what's required in this country to get us back on track. And so it's been really encouraging to see, the membership of the organization that helped get me elected and believes in these things expand and get some more energy. We're seeing a lot of people who are just fed up with the status quo, who want to make a positive impact in their community, come out and engage in politics in a way that they never have before. And we saw the same thing the last time Trump was elected, and when AOC was elected, and when Bernie Sanders ran, and throughout the pandemic as well. And I think it's always positive when everyday people get involved in the political process. And I think, going forward, the same things that have always been happening. There are Pinellas DSA members who are very active in the community, active in the labor movement, active in just the organizing community as a whole, active in city politics. Yeah, mutual aid. Yeah. And just to see more people come together is what it's going to take, because, I said, I got involved because of what I saw from Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2015 and 16. he said, and he's always said, like, we're not going to get the change that we need to see from our government just by getting people elected. We need to see like a groundswell of movement and working people coming together and building big groups of people that demand change. And that's how things get changed in our country. And they always have. You don't just take on the billionaire class as one individual, Richie Floyd, and make a difference. I need hundreds and thousands of people who are saying the same thing as me out in the community in order to make change happen. And so, yeah, I think it's going to play out not just in Pinellas County or Tampa, but in the entire country. And it's and now I'm optimistic and I'm really bright-eyed right now, but I'm also going to have to be realistic. The status quo doesn't change just for anybody. And so it will take a lot of work, but I think you're seeing that a lot of people are waking up and saying they're ready to put in that work.
Well, Richard, let's pick up on that because you're a member of DSA, but you are, as you said, a Democrat, and there's a lot of postmortems in the last 3 weeks about, capital W, what went wrong on Election Day. And here in Florida, of course, we're in a state where Donald Trump beat Joe Biden by 13 percentage points. And Rick Scott beat the Democratic Senate candidate, Debbie Merkersel-Powell, by 13 points. I mean, we're in a state of play here on a statewide level that we've never have been in terms of Republican Party dominance. Also, in the national level, a lot of discussion about the working class vote, right? And is the Democrats lost that now, and they maybe had a problem with non-college educated voters, and now you're seeing that with the black and brown voters to some extent. The Latino vote seemed to be much more a play here than previous election cycles. You have any thoughts about? I know you do have thoughts, but in terms of again this discussion coming from your perspective about working class, I know you're a big union guy. Look at John Tester lost in Montana. He was a big working class guy. Sherrod Brown in Ohio, same thing, and the Democrats couldn't win those. I mean, maybe can they ever get some of those votes back now from people who I don't know, they don't trust the party anymore? I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I can give it to you pretty straight and simple. Like, the Democratic Party for a long time has been trying to serve two masters, trying to have the labor movement and working class people vote for it, but also while getting gobs and gobs of money from billionaires in Silicon Valley and Wall Street. And it's illogical and not possible to actually square the two constituencies and make sure that you can serve both of them. It's just not realistic. And so I think what you saw across the entire country was the same thing that we saw in Florida in 2022. It's not that the entire country was like, I'm right wing now. It was that a huge portion of the base voters of the Democratic Party, and these are minorities, Latinos, African Americans, who just did not go out and vote. That's what we saw, for example, in St. Petersburg in 2022. We had 6,000 less voters in the 2022 gubernatorial election than we did in the 2018 gubernatorial election. Of those 6,000 in St. Petersburg, almost all of them, 5,900 of them, were black Democrats. They just did not vote after it. They voted in 2018 and they did not vote in 2022. And, you can make whatever reasoning you want for it. I think it's always going to be a little speculative, but it's very easy to see from my perspective that in 2018, we were running a candidate that was promising progressive change. And in 2022, we were running Charlie Crist, who,
Andrew Gillum.
Yeah, in 2018.
Yeah,
ran on
2018
Medicare
was
for
Andrew
All,
Gillum. I'm sorry.
Stand Your Ground, lots of other.
And in
progressives.
2022, we were running someone who was not exciting. Let's just be honest. Charlie Crist was not exciting. Like, my wife is, side note, my wife is from England, and she got her citizenship in 2022. And so her first vote was in that gubernatorial election, and she voted for Charlie Crist, because she had to. And we always make a joke like, she is now a true Floridian. At some point, all true Floridians have voted for Charlie Crist.
I love that.
Yeah. So awesome. Anyway, going forward, in Florida, we saw it for a long time. The Democratic Party is just obsessed with like red baiting and trying to pander to the Cuban vote, who's just not going to vote for them. And, having like imperialist fights, like who's more imperialist with the Republican Party. Like you saw Debbie, forgive me if I say her name wrong, Murkowski Powell,
Yeah.
Right.
arguing with Marco Rubio after the election when he gets nominated as Secretary of State, like, oh, well, now let's see if you're actually going to be tough on Venezuela and Cuba like you say you will be, like implying that he's not really going to be tough on them and she really would be tough on them. Look, the working people of Florida, for the most part, maybe a small percentage of them, for the most part, do not care who's going to be more tough on Venezuela and Cuba. They want to be able to put food on their table, clothes on their back, send their kids to a good school, and afford the roof over their head, and not have to worry about climate disaster happening every few minutes. And that's not what we're talking about. Like, we're talking about other things constantly. And so the Florida Democratic Party just showed the way to the National Democratic Party the wrong way. And, you're seeing it across the country. Kamala Harris was not able to speak to the concerns of everyday people. And I don't want to put the blame on Kamala Harris specifically, because this is a long time coming. Like, I think AOC said it when Joe Biden got elected. Like, Joe Biden's going to have to change people's lives significantly, or we're going to be back at square one at the end of his 4 years. And that's exactly what happened. Our lives did not change significantly under Joe Biden. If anything, it went the wrong way. And working people reacted exactly as you'd expect working people to react. It's not that they said we like Donald Trump now. I'm sure a couple of them maybe did, but what you saw across the entire country was people who just could not be bothered and stayed home. And so I think there's a couple of ways forward. Obviously, my preference would be for everyone to be like, we need to put the working class in charge and like do this economically populist agenda. I think that that's got to be part of it. But I think a big part of it is Democrats have to look and say, this is what we stand for, and stick to it, instead of being wishy-washy and trying to serve Silicon Valley and Wall Street and workers. They have to choose a path forward and stick to it and stick to their guns. Because I think a lot of voters are not necessarily looking for like this exact policy, that exact policy. They're looking for someone to fight for them. And, maybe you're not exactly what I want, but if you'll stand up for working people and fight for them, like, I think you'll have a much better shot in the future. And so, there's my little bit of optimism. Like, it can be changed. It's just going to take a lot of deliberate work and a lot of soul searching.
All right. Richie Floyd, District 8 City Councilman in the city of St. Petersburg. Thank you much for joining us today, and best of luck to you in your continued recovery there in the Central Oak Park neighborhood.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks for getting into some substantive issues with me. Yeah, happy Thanksgiving and a happy holidays to everyone who's listening. I hope everyone, during the recovery is able to still relax and spend time with their family.
For sure. Thank you so much. Richie. So to close the show here, speaking of Thanksgiving, every year at Creative Loafing, we do a holiday issue. There's holiday things to do, theater, things like that. But we also kind of try to put something on the cover that'll be a nice talking point at the table. Last year, we put we talked to both sides of the latest conflict between Israel and Palestine. We've talked about the history of Tampa and food. This year, we put Bree Wallace, case management director over at Tampa Bay Abortion Fund, frequent guest on the show now. She's on the cover, but it was part of this package about 6 organizations that offer a little bit of light in a world that for some has felt somewhat dark after the election, as Councilman Floyd was alluding to. And one of those organizations was the Refugee and Migrant Women Initiative, or RAMWE. That story was brought to CL by Julia Saad, who is actually a WMNF intern, who's reported on hurricane response and the unhoused here. She's also WUSF's Zimmerman Rush Family Digital News intern and was the news editor at USF school student newspaper, The Oracle. She joins us this morning. Julia, welcome to The Skinny. Are you here?
I am. Good morning. Almost afternoon. How are you guys?
Yeah. We always live in this kind of purgatory of the day where we kind of transition over and everybody's stomach is growling. Let me ask you something. I was totally unaware of RAMWE when I pitched this package to you. How did you come across this organization and the work that its founder, Florence Aki, are doing?
I actually had an idea of kind of what I wanted to bring to you, something focused on honestly 2 of the groups that I believe the election really focused on, which were women and migrants, right? People who come to our country to either seek a better future or, depending on the narrative you hear, right, other things. So I basically just used keywords on Google until I found a couple of organizations in Tampa Bay And the first link I found that brought me back to the website were actually photos of their last social Thanksgiving, which they had around 14 or 16 different countries, and brought food from those different countries just to bring the community together during the holidays. And I found Florence Aki after a very long chain of emails during the last week, and she was lovely. We had 30 minutes on Zoom, and she told me a little bit of her backstory, and it lined up a lot of what my family taught me, right? Just being open to other people and where they come from. And it was just a very nice story, very, very fun story to write during Thanksgiving time.
Romwe is a pretty large group, and you kind of alluded to this in your talk here, and Councilman Floyd talked about it. But, when things are going well for working class people, it kind of opens up the door to maybe, listening to anti-immigrant rhetoric and things like that. Your story for us talks a little bit about Trump and comments he made about mass deportation. As you talked with Florence, how did you feel like that rhetoric played out among the women in Romwe, who really have just come together because they all kind of share the same experience, but they really are just kind of growing this community together?
Yeah, I feel like Florence gave me a perspective that I didn't have on immigration, or in her case, right, these refugees that are coming and trying to seek a better life here outside of their home country, is that most women that come to the U.S. come already married, they're mothers, they've had their education, or they weren't able to get their education back in their home country. So they're well adapted to this environment that is not ours. And at first, Florence said that this invisible wound shows up in many women, which is this sense of loneliness, of not being worthy and not being able to really adapt to the environment, that it is very different here in the West. And I feel like it's important to notice that there's an added pressure to those women. And when they turn on the TV, that's the rhetoric that they're hearing. After a long day trying to advocate for their kids in school, not knowing really the terms and how to speak to principals and teachers, they have to come home, turn on the news, and listen to politicians claim that immigrants took 100% of the new jobs in the Biden administration, which is just incorrect. According to the U.S. Census, according to the Workforce Administration that has conducted those researches. And it's just a lot for these women. It's a lot of added pressure after a long day of trying to really adapt to this new country. So for me, coming here young, right, I was able to adapt pretty easily. I was able to go to school and see how social interactions happen. These women were brought up and they have to start a life from zero like that. So it's really a different perspective that was brought to me with that interview.
Yeah, in your story, Romwe founder Florence Aki said she hopes that others remember that people are more than their immigration or refugee status. And you kind of hit on this. I myself am the child of immigrants. I was born in Hawaii, but my parents are from the Philippines, and that sentiment hit me because, at least outside of when my mom was getting naturalized, when I look at my parents, I too never thought about their immigration status, and I never really thought about it a lot until you do get to these kind of heated political conversations, and you start thinking about that. Can you talk about a little bit about, kind of expand on what you were talking about in your experience coming here, and how you kind of balance that when you do a story like this? Because you do come with your own. I always argue that no journalist is truly objective. You come with your own experiences and things like that. So how do you kind of balance, your background when you report on immigration and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tend to agree with you. I think if I wasn't who I am, I wouldn't even have stumbled upon this organization. Obviously, I thought about my perspective during this election cycle, which, to be honest, as somebody who's not from here, every year in the U.S. kind of feels like an election cycle. But I think the biggest thing for me is my biggest ideas come from who I am. Obviously, I am a woman. I am somebody who was born here but was raised in Brazil by my Brazilian mom and my Arabic dad. And that's the culture I have, right? But at home, like you said, I just thought about being at home. I thought about the fact that we were all in this house trying to make it regardless of what other people thought about us. I was very fortunate to go to a school where there were a lot of other Brazilians and Latinos. I didn't feel othered by not having the biggest part of my education being outside of the country. So I think, yes, my objectiveness, quote unquote, is what brought me to this organization in the first place. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that's why we need diversity in newsrooms. I feel like a lot of other journalists can bring other perspectives that I didn't even think about. But when I sat down in my computer and thought about how during Thanksgiving, which is something I don't usually celebrate just because I wasn't raised here, most of my friends are going home to their families and I'm working on Black Fridays. So I thought about how it is sometimes lonely to spend holidays in a new country where you don't have access to your grandparents and your parents, your cousins. There's not a big tree at the end of the year, or there's not, a lot of people to light up candles with you. It's difficult to go through those cheery moments when your everyday is trying to adapt to this new country. So I feel like when you asked, how do I divide that when I tell the story? Ultimately, I can't divide it when I try to find the story, but when I tell it, I just try to tell it from the perspective of the people I interview versus what is going on and what I see that is going on in real time with narrative and politics and policies going through, and Florida ultimately receiving a lot of new people in. So with that whole mindset, the story is essentially what I see in my life. So I tend to be to find those ideas more appealing to me. But when I try to write it, I just try to be as honest as I can to everybody. I'm not an opinion writer, so I can't really put what I opinionate in there. But I really enjoy bringing this part of me into content that is digestible to everybody. It is my experience, but it is also something that can be educational for other people.
And with these last couple minutes that we have, what was your sense of how large the community that Ramwy serves is, and what do you think is next up for Aki as Ramwy moves forward?
It feels like she's been doing that her whole life, really. We talked a lot about things that I didn't really add at the article, but the way that she tried to communicate with the first couple of women that came to her as a health specialist saying that they were, they just wanted to talk to somebody. She crocheted with them. She just learned how to, put a skill into them that they could maybe either donate to the community or sell or whatever it is that they could have done with that skill. It feels massive. She communicated to me around 500 families, which includes at least 3 people, right? Most of those women, like I said, according to her, come into the country married and with kids. So you would assume the family includes a husband and either a son, a daughter, a child. So yeah, you can see I can see at least 1,000 people there from 16 different countries. So you can imagine how much of her, her influence spread, because even when she was telling me her first meeting with that woman that kept coming back just to talk to her, the second time she came around the apartment, there were already 5 new people. And then there were 20 new people in her living room. So just word of mouth and people trying to really adapt to the community, having the same struggles as how big and how quickly her influence went around the community. And I feel like for her, the next step, as it is for a bunch of nonprofit organizations, is just reaching out to their local communities. I feel like paying attention to news can make your community seem really big, and you feel kind of that distance between you and your neighbor's door. Aki really said that this is the time where we have to stick to our community, really not be scared to have that face-to-face hug and face-to-face embrace, because our community is way less scary than the TV made it seem. I'm sure that.
Julia Saad, Tampa Bay journalist, thank you so much for joining us here with Bylines at WMNF, WSF, now Creative Loafing, Tampa Bay. Councilman Richie Floyd at the top half of the program, thank you so much for joining us. You're listening to WMNF Tampa. This has been The Skitty. Thank you so much on behalf of myself, my co-hosts Ben Montgomery and Mitch Perry, Irene Matthews on the phone, Skip Sassy on the boards for us today. Joellen Schilke is here on Black Friday to talk about art in both of your ears. Please stay tuned to WMNF and have a really safe weekend. Thank you so much.